Let's start a slightly different journey into the world of fabric designing today. I'm going to be working with our flat paints. These are uniquely ours. They're a thick, creamy paint made in Australia, of course, that don't leave any hardness or firmness in the fabric whatsoever. Here's a little bit of flat paint stenciled onto silk, and there's just absolutely no stiffness there at all. I'm just going to do a little bit of printing, a little bit of stamping, a little bit of stenciling. Nothing terribly intelligent, just some quick how-tos so that you can interpret the paint and the skills to suit your style and your personality. Let's start with a leaf print. Gosh, the kids do this in kindy. I think we can do it and make it permanent on our fabrics. It's been raining at our place today, so I've actually dried off my leaves on a little bit of paper towel. What I'm looking for in the garden is a leaf with a fairly clearly defined vein, a nice shape of course, but not too shiny. Something that's shiny is not going to give as good a print as something that has a little bit of grippiness to it when you run your finger over it. Oh, this mint's going to be gorgeous to print with because of the smell. Sorry, you can't smell it. Okay, so I can build up a little picture with whatever leaves I've chosen, and I'll just do a couple of quick prints so you can get the idea of it. The flat paints come in a different sort of packaging from the liquid radiance, so we simply take off the cap, flop the paint down behind the nozzle, dispense it onto the palette, or anything from which you can work. And again, like the liquid radiance, these don't have names on it, so it's up to you to actually add that name to it so you know which is which. And you've saved yourself $2 in the purchase price of the product. When I'm working with my brushes to brush the paint onto the backs of my leaves, I like to work with a brush that's got a good firm feel to it, but not too firm. You can use a good quality bristle brush, but I'm choosing our elites from our range. I like to wet the brush first, but dry it well. Makes it a whole lot easier to clean later. And we simply then choose our leaf. Decision. Try to have a little handle on it to make, it stuck to me. And then paint the back of the leaf, just using a piece of scrap paper to protect your work surface. You'll notice I'm working here too on an old sheet. You need something grippy. It could be some flat board that you've used an adhesive spray on so your fabric sticks to it, but I'm just using an old sheet, and that's really good for big pieces of fabric. I'm going to ease that into place. If you had a really big leaf, you might use a satay stick to help settle it onto your fabric. Then with another sheet of paper, simply rub your hand across it evenly, and there you have your print. Try not to overload your leaf. It's a good idea to have a practice run somewhere first. Different textures of leaves will give you different things happening. Let's try a long skinny thing. And these can give a picture really nice dimension. Doesn't matter if it twists over. Let's take a clean piece of paper in case there was any colour on the other bit. And you can see a different look to that. And we might do 2 or 3 of those. Pine needles are good for this. Silky oak, brilliant. Stay. I think that flipped over, so that should give me a nice interesting little twist to my leaf. And if I want to put some sort of a base to that, let's try a fingerprint or 2. Don't worry if your fingers don't work all that well. Everybody's got a finger that works. These will make great grapes or little flowers. But I'm just making little rocky things there. Of course, it's all non-toxic, so we don't have to worry about getting messes on our hands. Just don't get it on your clothes because it is permanent. Now you can see I'm just putting my finger there in a little bit of water. That's because I can make a watercolour when I clean my brushes or any other equipment. Look, obviously I would build that up a little bit more. To make a decent sort of picture, but hey, this is a quick and easy. I think we might do a little bit of sponging just to add a little bit of extra texture to that. And when I'm using a sponge, just a drop of water onto that sponge helps to soften it. Work it in well. That's good. I'm going to be thin about teaching you to use a sponge because sponges can make a real mess if you're not gentle with them. So we're going to load, we're going to part unload, and then if we could keep our fingers out of the way it would be wonderful, but we've got to hang on to the sponge. So be so busy grabbing the sponge up high that your fingers don't get plonky. This is when it's really important. See how that just softens that off? This is when it's really important to have a very smooth surface underneath, because if you've got any lumps or bumps there, they will show when you're doing this really fine work. Okay, and that's a few little different things you can play with flat paints at this stage. We're going to work with rollers in a moment, so I'll clean off my sponge, add it to the water. And then put that somewhere so I can clean it properly later. When we want to do borders or straight lines in a design, the easiest way to do those is with masking tape. Various widths of masking tape are really handy. And I'm just going to do a border here. So I put down 2 wide tapes so that the paint doesn't sort of splodge onto my work. That'll protect that. But I wanted a little narrow border, so we've used the narrow tape. Leave it there for later in case I want to use some more. Now, add a bit more paint to the mix here. It is a thick, creamy paint. And if we want to adjust the viscosity of that, we can use a little bit of painting medium or paint thinners. Just a couple of drops. And this allows the paint to work off the brush or off the roller or off the equipment more easily. If we want a little longer to work, because the paint is so fast drying, we sometimes need extra time, we're going to add a little bit of retardant. Now the medium and retardant, or the thinners and retardant, are both liquid products, so they come with the flat cap. You simply, as for liquid radiance, take off the flat cap, add the dispenser cap. With the retardant, don't add any more than 1 part retardant to 5 parts paint, or your paint will go funny or curdled. That's too good to waste. These little rollers that I'm going to use now are my own design. They actually work. Chosen the foam. We have our own cutting machinery that makes them, and they last, unlike others I've tried on the market. To load our roller, we simply dab it across the paint, stretch the paint around the roller so it's evenly loaded, and apply it. I'm not pressing down, Just gently applying that, and our border is done. Having that stuck to the old sheet is a real benefit too, because it doesn't move around. Let's now apply that same paint to a stamp. Different textured stamps are going to give you different results. I like to use a roller for this because the brush tends to get the paint caught up within the stamp detail, and you don't get such a good result. We have our design. I'm going to have to make some more paint. Pop stick is good for stirring as well, if you don't have a palette knife, but don't ever use anything metallic on these palettes because it will scratch them and damage them. Again, too good to waste. Into the paint, stretch it on the tray of the palette, and see, this stamp will give a very different texture. It's a more open stamp, so I'm being really careful how I load that one. If I used a brush on that, it would definitely get it too splodgy. We have our stamp. And I will wash that off straight away. A damp chucks is a handy thing to have beside you. Makes them easier to clean. Another thing that makes your equipment easier to clean at the end of the painting task is the retardant that we've added to the paint mix. It just, yeah, you've got a long job, use retardant. If you want an easy clean-up job, use retardant. Okay, now let's add a stencil. We can do another little flower there. Roller loaded as before. The stencil has on the back of it a light coating of an adhesive spray, so that the stencil is actually gripping onto the fabric as I work. Eliminating any possibility of movement is important to have everything gripped. Now I'm being careful that my stencil does not slop into the areas around, into the holes around it as I work. But if you wanted to be absolutely sure, you would simply use some paper to cover any bits. That one's done. And let's do a little dry roller stencil. Now I could be in trouble with the stencil hitting onto that wet work, so I will definitely cover that with care. And this time I'm going to use a very different touch with my roller. I call this dry roller stenciling, but the roller isn't dry, my touch is dry. Dry paint, of course, won't bond to your fabric. And we have a different look by doing that. And while I'm playing with paper, see if we can create a nice little textured edge to our design. I'm sure you're going to come up with all sorts of amazing things that you can do. Just stuff. Rubbings by putting your items underneath. We used to do that as kids too, didn't we? Coins underneath and then rubbing with a pencil. Well, we can put things underneath and rub with paint. Oh, let's try it. I'm sure the stamp will be quite happy to do that. Very different result from doing the stamp itself, because you get a little bit of the colour in through the design as well. Something more open would give you a clearer design. Now we have all this lovely watercolour. And we haven't wasted our paint. So that can be used for colouring fabric in pretty much the same way as we use liquid radiance. It is capable of being salted. The results will be slightly different when you're working with watercolour flats, and there's a whole new section in the updated Understanding Fabric Art Handbook that will take you through that in all sorts of detail. However, what I'm going to do now is just put something that's when you hear that these things are stuck together with the adhesive spray underneath, and I could either pour or brush the watercolour on. It is really important, however, that the rest of your work is dry before you do this. I'm just going to use a big brush to get it there. That bit won't be dry. Those bits are. Those bits definitely are, so I'll just work on this bottom part of my work of art. Or you could use a little sprayer to do this. And if I don't want the colour to go into any of those areas, I just simply wet them. That's where it is important that everything is dry. But with these light coverage techniques, yes, they have had time to dry. Good idea to do the craft paper test to make sure that your colour isn't too strong. I didn't do that, did I? Oh, I could have watered that down a whole lot more. Remember too that when you're watering things, the colours will bleed and continue to bleed. Get rid of that hard line. That hard line. Oops, where is it? I'll add a bit of salt. And that will continue to bleed and stop. Probably not the most amazing work of art you've ever seen, but hopefully it'll just give you a few ideas as to what you can do with the flat paints, creating all sorts of textures. I'm going to have to bang this. And creating things to make your fabric designing individually yours.